on. There we go. Got to hear that first. It's time for Daniel in the Deacon's Den. Good morning to you, Deacon Dan. How are you this morning?
Good morning. I am doing great. I'm still laughing about the Nigeria joke.
That was crazy funny. Yeah. Good stuff.
Just need the PIN number and the bank details.
That's right.
You gotta watch what's in the news. I bet you hear that a lot, don't you? There's so much out there that is leading us to the wrong conclusion, so to speak. They like to make up our mind for us instead of just reporting the news.
Absolutely. I think we have to be so careful about what people are saying in the news because sometimes we have to defend ourselves, and other times we can just be flat out misled by statements that people are making. We often talk about in formation that an effective homilist is going to go through his life with a Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. So the idea is keeping abreast of what's going on in the world by looking at that newspaper and looking at the newscasts, but at the same time using those events to try to preach the gospel message. And so I pay really close attention to news headlines. I don't tend to go very deep. Like sometimes I'll just read the headlines and what's going on, or the first couple of paragraphs. But I want to know what people are thinking about. We talked about last week that the deacon has one foot in the church and one foot in the world. So keeping track of what people are reading and hearing about in the news helps me to be able to perform my ministry. And so it kind of occurred to me that there are a couple of times in the last few months when the news media, someone said something in the news that just really got under my skin that I actually felt the need to either preach about or talk with groups about to kind of clear up the misconception. So here's the first example. It was at the end of August last year, and we all remember that horrible shooting of school children in the church in Minneapolis. And in that shooting, there were 3 people killed and 27 injured. And it was just such a terrible event. And the next day at the press conference, the mayor of Minneapolis gets up, and the first thing he says is, "Don't say this is about prayers. We need to do something."
Yeah. Right.
And I just sat there in shock for a minute. I mean, I literally was in shock. I thought, okay, he has totally dismissed prayer as not doing anything. And it reminded me of last summer in June, Bishop Eric Pohlmeyer from Orlando spoke. He was the keynoter at the Deacon Convocation that we have every 2 years. And at the convocation, he said, I can quote Bishop Pohlmeyer here, he said, "Most people don't believe prayers accomplish anything." And I thought to myself, I don't know if that's really true, but he's right. Because how often do maybe we've even said it ourselves, something like, "Boy, I'm really sorry that family is struggling financially. I don't have the money to be able to help them. I feel sorry for him. I guess I can pray for him."
Right.
Or this person who is experiencing whatever, they're on the other side of the ocean, and there's nothing I can do. I guess I'll just pray. And what we do is we treat it as if prayer is the last resort instead of the first thing we should be doing, And so I think that comes from the fact that we live in a results-driven society. If a principal is hired to work in a high school and he doesn't or she doesn't raise the test scores within 3 years, they get fired. If a CEO is hired and doesn't raise the profits, or heaven knows, if a football coach is hired and doesn't turn it into a winning season within 2 years, they just get fired. Right. And so we expect everything we do, that if we plug this in, it better pay a dividend right away. And so it's really hard to prove that prayer actually had an impact, and yet we know it does. We know that Jesus prayed all the time, and he would pull away from the apostles. He'd pray with them. He'd pray separate from them. And so those are the kind of statements I think we have to push back on, because when people hear a statement like that from the mayor, they just automatically start to think, actually that's a good point. Let's stop talking about prayer. It's not necessary. When in reality it is totally necessary, And the other example that I have, what was much more recent, was just actually this last week. And you may have seen in the news that, again, another terribly unfortunate event where someone broke into a Catholic school in Long Beach, California, and busted the place up. This happened on February 2nd. And, they broke statues. They broke the statue of Mary. They threw the tabernacle to the floor. They ruined sound equipment. They threw Bibles around. It was just really sad. Some very sick individual was in there that we need to pray for. I don't think he's been or she has been identified yet. But they did of over $100,000 worth of damage. So the next morning after that happened, I was watching the television report being broadcast from California online, and the local reporter said, and I have a quote on this, the reporter said, because of the things that happened in that school yesterday, children will no longer be able to worship their icons.
Oh my goodness.
I sat there and I was just frozen. I couldn't believe that she said that. And what happened after that is, if you try to find it online right now, you won't be able to, because they have gotten rid of it. There was so much backlash about that statement, and a number of the how like when they publish something online and people can post back, and people had so much backlash, the station ended up walking it back. And eventually what they're saying now is, well, what she meant was that the icons would not be available in the church when the children worship. Sorry, the damage was already done. I heard that statement. I am absolutely 100% sure that that's what she said.
Right.
So, it reminded me of, I get that question a lot in OCIA, working with non-Catholics. We're bringing 20 people into the church, and they're going to ask me questions like, why do Catholics use icons and paintings and statues? Is that violating the Ten Commandments? And the response I usually give is I will always ask that person, do you have a picture of any family members or friends in your dorm or your apartment or your house? And they always say yes. And I'll say, well, why do you have it hanging on your wall? And they'll say something like, well, it reminds me of my parents or my girlfriend or my brother, and it just makes me feel their presence. And I say, you know what? The church is the same thing with icons, statues, paintings. It reminds us of the presence of that communion of saints. We would certainly never worship an icon. That's ridiculous. But the visual will help us to remember those that we honor as saints and those who serve as Christian models for how we should live our lives. And there's this whole big misconception there about what we believe about the use of images as Catholics, and a television report like that just helps to nail that hammer even harder, and perpetuates really the misconception. And so what the media's wording has demonstrated is a bias. It's a bias against Catholic teaching, and it only serves to make it even worse in terms of misunderstanding. So I think in general, what I have learned is that we've just got to be on guard. We have to be aware that the media so often misinterprets what we believe, and we've got to be ready to defend ourselves when that happens. And to me, here's a little plug, a big plug, but that's the beauty of Catholic radio.
Amen.
When I'm listening to this radio station, I know that I'm hearing the truth. When I turn on EWTN or the Catholic Faith Network, I know that I'm hearing it through a Catholic perspective, a lens that perpetuates the truth and doesn't distort it into that non-Catholic way of looking at things that we so often encounter in the media. So I just encourage our listeners to be vigilant about that and be ready to defend yourself when people misinterpret what we believe as Catholics.
Yeah, I love it. Can you imagine a reporter standing outside the home of a family's home that has just burned down and saying to that family, I'm sorry that you're no longer able to worship your grandmother and grandfather's icons any longer? I mean, the same thing. You lost your ancestors' pictures, and, come on. It's so ridiculous. But yeah, thanks be to God, they even had to correct it. So because of the
they definitely did. And one of the things that always makes me wonder, when you hear something like that, did that reporter have that much of a misunderstanding or ignorance of the Catholic Church that she misstated it?
Yeah.
Or was it an intentional dig against our faith?
Yeah, that's true. You don't really know.
I'm going to try in all charity to assume ignorance is at play here. But it doesn't matter, because in the end, the damage is already done when they make that statement.
Kind of a snarky comment,
Yeah.
Yes.
But you do hope it's ignorance, because ignorance can be corrected. That's for sure. So, Thank you, Deacon Dan.
You're welcome. Have a great week.